Hi, welcome back to Intro to Jazz Vinyl in 2021. Today we're going to be talking about the Music Matters Jazz Blue Note reissue series. And there are actually 3 series within this series. If you do a little digging on the internet on a popular audio discussion forum, you will find the Music Matters thread, which over 1,305 pages as of the recording of this video, has 32,619 posts, and I've read them all. I'm going to do my best to summarize for you the knowledge to be found there within and give you a little bit of info about this series. If you're new to jazz vinyl in 2021, there are some things about this series that are going to be extremely familiar to you. So let's just dive right in and talk about what those might be. First off, let's take a look at the record itself. This series started in late 2007, so the bulk of it really started to get going in 2008. And this record was mastered by Kevin Gray at Acoustic Mastering. The series was contemporaneous with Analogue Productions' Blue Note reissue series, and like Analogue Productions, this one is also cut at 45. So when the Music Matters reissue series began, these records were coming out at the same time as the Analogue Productions Blue Note series, and they were being mastered by the same person, or same people, Kevin Gray and Steve Hoffman, at the same mastering lab, Acoustic Mastering. So what's the difference between a Music Matters Blue Note reissue and an Analogue Productions Blue Note reissue in 2008? Really comes down to the gatefold. This is the Stoughton tip-on gatefold jacket reproduction of the original Blue Note art with session photos on the inside that you can find today as a Tone Poet release. Began here with Music Matters. So this is their enduring contribution to jazz vinyl reissues. And the other difference, aside from just the aesthetics, and it's kind of, I don't know how much difference this makes, but it is a difference. But if you're looking for a reason why maybe the Music Matters 45 RPM reissues have something a little extra to them that the Analogue Productions do not. And again, I don't feel that way. I think they're both great. But if you were convinced that for whatever reason, the Music Matters 45s sound better than the Analogue Productions 45s, one other difference in the mastering and production chain is that Music Matters is not too far from Acoustic Mastering, and well, Acoustic Mastering is not there anymore, but wasn't too far from Acoustic Mastering and is not too far from Coherent Audio, which means that anytime anything was being mastered for Music Matters, Rambach, who was the founder of Music Matters, could take that lacquer as soon as it was cut by Kevin Gray and immediately drive it over to RTI to get plated. And really, it couldn't have been done any faster. It is supposed to be the case that once you cut a lacquer, the longer you wait to get it in the tank to plate it with metal so it can be used to make the stamper parts, that the longer you wait, the worse the sound is. And so Ron Rambach took this to the other extreme. Let's do everything we can to preserve everything that was cut into the lacquer. So that's how Music Matters began, as a 45 RPM reissue series for, audiophile jazz fans. In fact, not just any 45 RPM reissue series, the definitive 45 RPM reissue series. Again, this is happening at the same time as the Analogue Productions, a Blue Note series. So I guess there's a little bit of, I hope, friendly competition. One interesting thing about the Music Matters catalog is, as Joe Harley, the Tone Poet, who was Ron Rambach's partner in this, tells it, they really had their pick of the Blue Note catalog. And so the Analogue Productions Blue Note series is very much an expression of Chad Kassam's personal and professional taste. And the Music Matters catalog is an expression of Ron Rambach and Joe Harley's personal musical taste. So what did they make? Yes, they did some of the most famous Blue Note albums of all time. They also did some deeper cuts. This album, Here to Stay, was a kind of classic Blue Note period album. It was recorded December 27th, 1962. It's got a killer lineup, but it was shelved after it was recorded. This happened a lot in Blue Note history. Somebody would come in, they would cut an album, it would be great, and for whatever reason, the album would just never see the light of day. So Music Matters put out some of the super famous albums. They put out some albums that, maybe they felt like should have been put out, but weren't put out for whatever reason back in the day. They also put out some albums that lean towards kind of the more avant-garde type of jazz. So things that were maybe critically acclaimed either at the time or after the fact, but weren't necessarily commercial hits. And actually, in the case of this particular one, I believe Music Matters actually, they assembled this album themselves. So Hank Mobley has an album called No Room for Squares, and I can't remember the other record, but anyhow, Hank Mobley recorded two albums worth of music over 2 sessions, and half of each of those sessions got put together in an album. And this is the issue of the session with Donald Byrd and Herbie Hancock that happened all together. So it had never been heard all on one record before. So Music Matters original, The Feeling's Good. So it's a really interesting series in that regard. And from late 2007, I believe Art Blakey's The Big Beat was the first issue until 2014. You've got this reissue series, and it's all the same. 45 RPM, this gatefold jacket with the session photos on the inside, and 2 per month, every single month. The catalog of Music Matters is pretty interesting. You could just tell Joe Harley and Ron Rambach really like Wayne Shorter. They really like Stanley Turrentine. They really like Art Blakey. They really like tenor sax in general, I think, because there's a lot of Joe Henderson in addition to Wayne Shorter. And they don't seem to care for the 3 sounds too much, or Jimmy Smith at all. No Jimmy Smith albums. Only one 3 sounds album, but with Stanley Turrentine. So again, it's kind of interesting. It wasn't an attempt to be a general slice of Blue Note records over a particular time period, or all of the best anything. It's just, these are the things that we like, that we think that our customers will like too. So eventually though, deep into the reissue series, here's another one, Una Mas, Kenny Dorham, cut at 45 RPM. A change happened. 2 changes happened in the 45 era. One was Music Matters changed not Music Matters, rather. At acoustic mastering, the cables in the signal chain were swapped out for a different brand of cable. AudioQuest. Joe Harley was involved. He was a executive at AudioQuest, and by Kevin Gray and Ron Rambach and Joe Harley's account, swapping out these cables at acoustic mastering really elevated the sound of those albums. So if you get really into these Music Matters titles, people tend to differentiate between the early Music Matters albums. So for example, again, The Big Beat by Art Blakey was the first one. That era versus when the cables were swapped out at acoustic mastering. Eventually, acoustic mastering closed down. Steve Hoffman was no longer involved with the mastering, and Kevin Gray opened up his own studio, Coherent Audio, which if you have seen any of my other videos. That's kind of one of the 2 hot spots today, along with Sterling Sound and mastering by Ryan K. Smith. But Kevin Gray opens up Coherent Audio, again brings his upgraded signal chain with him, and some of these 45s were issued at Coherent Audio. So you have 45s at acoustic mastering, pre-cable upgrade, 45s at acoustic mastering, post cable upgrade, and then 45s at coherent audio, again with the upgraded signal path. The last 45s I think that were issued were Art Blakey Live at the Cafe Bohemia and Volume 1 and Volume 2. I think that was in 2014, maybe 2015. The very next year, Music Matters did something a little bit interesting. They came back with one of these. Same thing, gatefold cover, 33 RPM. 33 RPM record. This particular one was mastered by, let's see, what's in the runout here? Kevin Gray and Ron Rambach at Coherent Audio. The really interesting thing is not that Music Matters moved away from 45 RPM reissues. I mean, that's kind of interesting. If this is supposed to be the ultimate reissue series and we want the best possible, capture of whatever's on the master tapes, and 45 RPM is going to get you there, why would you do anything at 33 RPM? Kind of interesting as a question. But the really interesting thing about this to me is, this particular record, they'd already done at 45. So not only are they moving away from the 45 RPM format, the feeling was so strong that whatever Kevin Gray was able to do on 33 at Coherent Audio, either through some function of his upgraded signal chain or just sheer knowledge of how to get the most out of these Blue Note tapes after having done hundreds of these reissues at 45 RPM, whatever the case may be, the feeling was so strong that he could do a better product at any speed, but I guess at 33 RPM, that if you bought Little Johnny C at 45 RPM, you still should go buy Little Johnny C at 33 RPM, because this Little Johnny C is going to be better than this Little Johnny C from 5 years earlier. This has been far from settled among people that like these records. There are people who say, I like the 33 better just because of the convenience. There are people that say, I like the 33 better because it sounds better. And there are people who say the 45 is better. The sort of caricature statement that people tend to make without any real explanation of what they mean by it or what's in their signal, what's in their setup at home, is that the 33s tend to be cut brighter. So they're kind of more in your face. And initially they can seem to be very powerful, but the listening can be kind of fatiguing and they don't sound necessarily as realistic and relaxed as the 45 RPM. I don't know. You can let your ears decide. One thing that I will come out and just say, though, unequivocally, is that this album has a dumb name, but it is a great album, and it's got a killer lineup. So if you don't know Little Johnny C, you should check it out. Music Matters did not limit their 33 RPM reissues to things that they'd already done on 45 RPM, though, which was probably a good business practice. They did a couple interesting things. One was to reissue this album, Candy by Lee Morgan, which was originally done, as you can see here, if you remember, if you've seen my video where I discussed this before, or maybe you already know this, where it says microgroove, that means it was done in mono. So that's Lee Morgan's Candy in mono, and somewhere here I've got Lee Morgan's Candy in stereo. So they discovered a new master tape that had been unused, I think. I think it had never been put out as stereo, so they jumped at the chance to use that. Kind of a neat thing for listeners. Point of departure, Andrew Hill. Again, this is one of those avant-garde-ish albums. They did this one at 45 and at 33 RPM. But now, another interesting thing, they did some titles, they did a lot of titles that Analogue Productions had done at 45 RPM. that they got the license to do it at 33 RPM, and this was all part of that same series. Green Street, issued by Analogue Productions, and a lot of the records I showed during the Analogue Productions video. What did I show you? Moanin', something else, Blue Train. I think I talked about Maiden Voyage if I didn't show it to you. All those things were put out at 33 RPM by Music Matters. So I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know any of these people, why they made the switch to 33 for the series. Certainly, whatever the motivation was, one of the benefits of switching to a 33 RPM format is that Music Matters could reissue some titles that they weren't able to secure in the first place in 2008. Some of the titles that they wanted to reissue undoubtedly went to Analogue Productions, but they were able to put them out 5 years later at 33 RPM. And in fact, we know that it's not just by saying, oh, after the fact they put out at 33 RPM this album, so they must have wanted to do it at 45 RPM, and just using logic like that. But if you saw my video on the Analogue Productions reissue series, there's literally one title that Ron Rambach and Joe Harley thought that they had the rights to issue at 45, Lee Morgan's Leeway. So they were there to supervise the cutting of that lacquer at Acoustic Mastering, and then they found out, whoops, this one's actually supposed to go to Analogue Productions. Their team, the Music Matters team, supervised the cutting of the Analogue Productions release of Leeway on accident because they both wanted to release it. Only Analogue Productions had the rights to it. When Music Matters started the 33 series, nobody should have been surprised that Leeway made it into there. So you can hear Leeway done by the Music Matters team at 45 at Acoustic Mastering, and you can hear Leeway done by the Music Matters team at 33 by Kevin Gray at Coherent Audio. So that is a brief history of the formats of 45 and 33 RPM on Music Matters, and the story kind of ended in 2017. Music Matters kind of closed up shop and said, that's it. We've said all we had to say about Blue Note Records, and everything that we want to put out that we think sounds great, we put out. There are some things we wanted to put out, but the tapes aren't in good shape, and we're not going to put out something that doesn't sound great. So, barring some new discovery, that's all you're going to hear from us. 2017. 2019, Music Matters reemerged and said, well, there is a new discovery. A new vinyl formulation from RTI, Record Technology Incorporated, that Music Matters calls SRX, Silent Running Experience. It's used by a couple other manufacturers now, and each manufacturer calls it something different. Super Vinyl, for example, is what Mobile Fidelity calls it. But this new vinyl, it's kind of see-through gray. And the SRX vinyl is supposed to be significantly quieter than the traditional black vinyl, which lowers the noise floor and helps bring out more details in the music. So in 2019, Music Matters did 12 new titles in the SRX format on 33 RPM, and those were not an immediate sellout. Some of them sold out reasonably quickly. Others of them stayed in stock in Music Matters for a long time, and they took forever to sell out. In 2020, Music Matters announced that they were going to do an SRX run of some of their greatest hits. So they were going to do Moanin' on SRX. They were going to do Grant Green, Idle Moments. They were going to do Lee Morgan, In Search of the New Land, The Sidewinder, all on SRX. And those sold out almost immediately, and they're very hard to get. Some of them cost $400 a pop now. I think Speak No Evil is running around $400 on the secondary market now in the SRX format. That seems to be it, though. There have been hints of more things to come from Music Matters, but nothing firm. And if you check out their website, you can see they're out of stock of anything in the 33 RPM format. There's still about 40 titles and 45 that you can get your hands on. Some of them are more or less at the original retail price of around $40, and some of them are upwards of $120 on the Music Matters site now. But it seems like they're not coming back once they're gone, and also that if you were a fan of the 45 RPM format, not too many people doing that now. So if you like that, you should probably grab these. The 33 RPM Music Matters are interesting though, because if you are buying new jazz vinyl reissues, maybe you got your hands on, this is early June 2021, maybe you got your hands on Art Blakey's The Witch Doctor. And if you did, well, you're going to see something that looks awfully similar to this Music Matters 33. You've got the original reproduction of the jacket, gatefold with the session photos inside, and you've got the record mastered by Kevin Gray at Coherent Audio. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is this one is also KPG and RR at CA. Kevin Gray and Ron Rambach at Coherent Audio. Ron Rambach is half of the Music Matters team, the founder of Music Matters, and he's not involved with the Tone Poet series. This innovation in packaging and design and overall presentation of the record is at least 50% of Ron's contribution, being part of Music Matters, and that has become the standard now. Joe Harley is the Tone Poet. The other half of Music Matters is putting these Tone Poets out, and they're really indistinguishable package-wise and mastering credit-wise from the Music Matters records. Again, with the two exceptions being Ron Rambach is not going to be in the run-out, and also he's probably not driving the lacquers over to get plated at RTI. So that is the answer to the question that you may have asked yourself, or you may have seen asked. When are we going to see, Art Blakey Indestructible on Tone Poet? Or when are we going to see Speak No Evil as a Tone Poet? Well, you're not, because Joe Harley already did those with Music Matters. And whether it's that he feels like he owes Ron Rambach not to do them again and compete with Ron at Music Matters, or whether he just feels like he already did those the best he could do them, and he's got other more interesting things to do, I don't know. But the Tone Poet series is something that you shouldn't expect to see reissuing something that came out under Music Matters. However, you can very much expect that the Blue Note Classic series will reissue things that came out through Music Matters. And those records are great. They sound amazing. They don't have the gatefold. They don't have the stout and tip-on glossy jacket. They don't have the session photos on the inside. But just kind of pound for pound, audio-wise, they sound amazing. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a big difference between that and the Music Matters version to your average listener's ears. But if you want the Music Matters treatment, you're not going to get it on the Blue Note Classic Reissue series. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the schedule for the first year of Blue Note Classic Reissue series, it's almost all titles that were done on Music Matters. I think it's clear to Don Was and his team at Blue Note Records that people really want affordable in-print copies of these records that were done by both Analogue Productions and Music Matters that aren't available anymore. They want them mastered all analog by Kevin Gray, if anybody cares about that is buying these things. And they don't want to have to pay $200 for them. So if Joe Harley's not interested in putting them out as a Tone Poet, Don Was is signaling, don't worry, I'll put them out as Blue Note Classics. Is the gatefold worth an extra $200 to you? Or is getting it in 45 worth an extra $300 to you? Obviously, I can't say that, but those are the big differences. In the Tone Poet video, I said that the Tone Poets kind of represent the past, present, and future of jazz vinyl reissues. The link to the past comes straight through Music Matters. The Tone Poets are, for all intents and purposes, pretty much identical to what Music Matters was doing at 33 RPM. And if you don't believe that getting the records plated a few hours earlier makes any difference, then they're really indistinguishable. So that's the past and present. How are the Tone Poets the future? Well, in the next video, we'll see what Analogue Productions is up to these days, and how Tone Poets have shifted the landscape of high quality, affordable jazz reissues. 25 minutes. Thanks for sticking with me if you made it this far. Again, I know it's kind of a lot, but it's a long history. It's 13, 14 years now. And again, on the Steve Hoffman forums, the discussion thread about Music Matters, it's on page 1,305, 32,619 posts. So 25 minutes and 28 seconds is long, but not as long as it would take to read that. If I got something wrong or you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.